So that's it. The rest is the epilogue. Right? Novelization of my experiences. And I gotta say, those paragraphs were quite choice. Right? Really, really wonderful writing. Came at a cost, and it cost me everything. Everything. Right? I'm gonna have pain forever as a result of being on the street in that way. I see how those people that are out there a long time, they end up as like goblins, scoliosis, fucked up backs. They got canes and shit, right? Because they're sleeping on the concrete, right? You can't sleep on the grass, right? Because they all got sprinklers. Unless you're like, you're calculating. I always set my alarm for 30 minutes before the sprinkler goes off. So there's a nice irony there that I would mention the gravedigger scene. Of course, I didn't think about that. I don't ever look at the pages before I read them. I've just been reading them in order. Right? So, the daughter, right? Of course, I've said it before in several of these most recent videos, right? That the only logical answer is to make me appear insane. That William Morris Endeavor got my letter and said, "What's your problem? Like, why do you gotta make everything a fucked up mind game? Right? You reach out to this guy, right? And he said, no, I'm gonna show that he's insane, right? Because he wanted to act like his mind's as strong as mine is, right? And in that way, right, I made a fool of myself several times over. So I started writing the love poems, right? So again and again, it's backwards. Right, that this is like, these are the games that he likes to play, right? That he puts his women on men and then watches through the mind's eye, right? And the women like are in spiritual communion with their legs wide open for another man, right? And so, right? Of course, he's never going to admit this. But it's obviously true, right? And so now, like, it's become reversed, right? Where he's normally in the other room, right? Watching in the mind's eye. Now, he was in the room with them. And they were, right? So he's directing, right? He's a director. It's a piece of direction, right? I spent all of that time, like literally all like 7 months, 8 months, feeling like, oh gosh, like how do I make it right? Like this is why I wrote everyone. And just to be clear, right, just so that like we're all on the same page here, right? When I wrote them, right, all I asked them to do was to help Quentin say something to me, right? I didn't say Quentin Tarantino's possessing my mind. Right? I didn't say anything of the kind, right? I offered my adoration, my appreciation of their body of work, told them that that Quentin, that me and Quentin have this complicated relationship, and after I didn't give him what he wanted, right, he refuses to see me, and so will you please just write him and say, please reconcile, like say something to this man so that he knows what you want. That's all. That's all. I didn't write them and say, hey, like I'm trying to play the movie critic. Anything of the kind, right? And it's obvious now that he got ahead of it every single time. That he wrote all those people and said, this guy doesn't have anything to do with me, right? He's not the reason I canceled the film, etc., 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 Christ fan. And so, like, obviously, like, if that was me, right? Like, if I was Trey Anastasio, right? If I was David Berlinski, right? And I got this note from Quentin Tarantino, right? The first thing I would have said is, what the fuck do you care? How do you even know that he's writing? Right? Oh, so you said this guy's got nothing to do with you, but you know that he's writing us. Right? My point is that he operates on a level of deception. right? And everyone's googly-eyed because he wrote Pulp Fiction, right? Right? Burbank International Film Festival wants to fucking give this guy the Vanguard Award, right? And so the last thing that I'll say about it, I guess I'm gonna try to sing a song. I tried to sing it yesterday and I just wasn't quite getting it. We'll try again today. The last thing that I'll say about that is we're steeped in it, right? We're in a pool of molasses, right? All of us drowning. Me, Quentin, anyone that's involved with him, right? Right, and the people around me too. All of our relationships have suffered measurably as a result of, his tactics, right? That if, to whom it may concern, right? That if you receive, a correspondence from me, right? That if you're a film festival that's venerating him, right? Or if you work at his coffee shop in Hollywood, right? Or if you work at the New Beverly Cinema, right? And you interact with Quentin, right? Right? You represent Quentin, right? Boom, I'm right there, right? And every time that you look at him, right? It's important to remind yourself, what is he doing to Brian right now? Right? This is now, right? Anytime he's publicly speaking, anyone who brings him out on the stage, right? Scott Feinberg, the Hollywood Reporter, right? When you look him in the eye, how is Quentin torturing Brian Jennings right now, right? And so my point, right, is that if there is any part of any of you, right, whomever you may be, right, from here to the edges of eternity, return to forever, right, that believes anything that I'm saying, you're obligated to say something about it and say, if any of the things that he's saying are true, then I don't approve, and in fact, I'm disgusted by your behavior, because there's no other way to look at it, right? So, there it is, right? Every time you see Quentin, you think of me, right? Because he and I are right there forever, right? He's going to lie to all of you, because that's what he does. But what I'm saying is it's time to buff the varnish off of him, right? It's time to elevate your understanding, right? To degrade him and put him where he needs to be on the earth, because he is a demiurge, he's not a god. And so now the real last thing that I'll mention, right, before I start singing, is that I watched an interview with the late master Chick Corea earlier, and I've been listening to a lot of his albums, The Return to Forever, and the guy who was interviewing him, he said something about, about writing out the music, transcribing the music that you're listening to. And he said something to the effect of taking possession of it, right? And so that's, right, that harkens perfectly to everything that I've been saying on this channel the last few days. In particular, in the passages that I just read, right? That writing, right, you can do this, and you're just masturbating, all over the screen, But if you hold a pen in your hand, right, and you push it, right, it's a psychic pressure, right? And it yields better quality, right? And so this must be true with music as well, right? That you can listen to a song and you can know it forwards and backwards, right? But you do not know it as well as someone who can transcribe it. And of course, music is another perfect metaphor for the Kundalini, right? That everything is a doubling back, right? That music is conceived in the mind and then expressed through the hands and the mouth, right? And the feet, through the body, right? So this is what everyone does, right? This is the necessary byproduct of our divine structuring, right? Everything is divided, bifurcated, right? Right? Some people have said that 2 is associated with evil, right? Because it is a division, right? It expresses all of manifested reality, right? And it is the second geometric ratio. Right? The first one is 1 to pi, second one is 1 to root 2, right? Which is the diagonal of the square, right? Of course, it's not evil in and of itself, because it's a symbol of communion, right? Of bringing two halves together, right? So, right? This is what Quentin does, right? When he writes his films, right? This is what anyone does when they write anything, right? That it's doubling back, that it goes and then comes back, right? And then if you go by Joseph Campbell's standards, right, that it goes up to 7 and down to 5. Isn't that funny? Right? That it has to come in order to express, right? And the 5 is the throat. Right? In order to express a thought, right? The notion has to emerge from up here, from overhead, right? From the divinity, right? Life is not an accident. All life derives from a divine intellectual origin, which is not a creature, it's an abstract intellectual principle, which exerts its knowing upon the quantum manifold, which is an infinite nesting of complex polyhedra in the school of Johannes Kepler. And as it exerts pressure upon it, right, it engenders electric resistance as friction against itself until it becomes so dense and pregnant with electricity it can no longer remain in airspace and erupts into incandescence as matter, right? This is the same thing that the psychic clairvoyant adept does, right? That he taps his mental awareness, right, his mind, which is God's mind, into a disparate locale by harmonizing the atomic behavior of the atoms comprising their brain with the atoms comprising the material of the disparate locale. And so the highest expressions of said adeptship sees the adept behaving like God, right? You can heal the sick, right? You can write a song, you can write a book, and far easier, right? You can bring people together and all focus towards destroying someone that doesn't fit into your vision, right? Which of course is the pinnacle of satanic evil. So pray for me, pray for Quentin.